All right. Well, we couldn't quite do it. The Braves were just too good, huh? Any Braves fans here? No? Well, hey, great team to lose to. I mean, I'm kind of excited for all my Georgia peeps and my friends who've been lifelong Braves fans. They were pretty excited. So we have some haters here, huh? Oh, I knew I was forgetting something. The 12 or 15 steps I do when I get up there, I have to remember to turn several things on, and something didn't seem right. All right. That should do it. Almost there. That looks good. That volume level looks about right. Oh, you were going to tell me, right, that I'm not up there. Okay. And we are rolling. I'm glad that you're here tonight. Thankful finally getting the sweater weather that I've been waiting for, and got to wear a long sleeve shirt tonight and get to wear nice, cozy, soft things for at least a few weeks, right? Or or hopefully for a few months is what we're hoping. Or is it I haven't been paying attention. Is it supposed to get hot again here? Come on. Is it? It's going to warm right back up? All right, well, let's just enjoy it while we can tonight. I'm working on the files, and this is where all the information in this file, that's what the icon for the file looks like in the folder. And we're finishing out Acts 2 finally. And this final paragraph, I just want to read it again with you. I'm going to preach on it, Lord willing, soon. I've preached on it here before. It's a great text. This is one of the great chapters of the Bible, and this is a very important summary of the kingdom of God, of this new community of believers that at last has been realized, and all that God had promised and everything that God had prepared for through Israel and then pointed toward in the prophets, and now all of that has been realized, all of that has been fulfilled, and all of it, we see it come to fruition in this zealous, close-knit community of these new Christians as they'll come to be called eventually. So in this summary, notice beginning in verse 42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, and to the breaking of bread and the prayers. We'll look at each one of those terms here for a minute. We already looked at the apostles' teaching. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Okay, so notice we talked about the apostles' teaching, the importance of apostolic authority, and in case someone's just watching this and didn't see the references that we put up, we talked about the importance of understanding that we live out our relationship to God in the context of this new covenant through the teaching that He has given us through His inspired apostles and prophets. So being faithful to the Lord means submitting to the teaching of His inspired apostles. Apostolic authority, very important part of our identity of who we are as the Lord's people. And we kind of dealt with that hurriedly at the end of the class. But then he says this, I want to add this, and the fellowship. And the fellowship. You probably heard lessons before, just there's certain Greek words we hear a lot, like agape, the word for love, and I think this is another one of those. You probably heard lessons, many of you, about fellowship, the Greek word koinonia. Koinonia, I've got it here. And it means a sharing, joint participation. When you participate in something and I do as well, and so we have that connection. And it's sometimes used of helping someone monetarily because you are extending a kind of cooperation in that person's need and addressing that person's need. So it's the idea of this sharing that he's talking about, and it's the same root word down in verse 44 when he says all who believe were together and had all things common, all things in fellowship. Is the idea. Same term. And so the fellowship is critical. If you remember, John said in 1 John 1, 7 through 9, if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. So if you're in fellowship with God by walking in the light, and I'm in fellowship with God, then one of the blessings of that is we're in fellowship with each other. We have this joint experience. We have this connection. And he shows us how they lived it out. So it's a reality, but then it should be manifested. It should be manifested in our engagement and our involvement with each other that he goes on to describe. But this was a very important part of the life of these early disciples and the impact that they had on the Roman world. Could be seen in the way that they lived out their mutual love and the way they experienced this fellowship and manifested this fellowship. So we'll see that here as we continue. But then he says also the breaking of, and there's a definite article in here that's not in the English text for some reason, I don't know why, but it should be the breaking of, and then we should have the bread. And the reason I think that's important is he does talk about them breaking bread. It's a common way of talking about eating. It's an idiom for eating. We don't use it as much in modern Western culture, but when people talk about, hey, let's break bread together, or it's good for us in the church to break bread with one another, we're talking about eating meals, and he does talk about them doing that every day together. But it seems to me in this list of items, he's giving us the basic, he's giving us the heart of the essentials of what this new community is about. They follow the apostles' teaching, and he's talking, I think, as well in the breaking of the bread and prayers about their worship. And so the breaking, it's not just any breaking of bread, but the breaking of the bread. And he says the prayers as well. It's interesting. It really irked me because I was reading one commentator. Notice he says of the prayers. We'll see that in a minute. And the commentator was saying, well, the breaking of the bread, that a lot of commentators, he said, think that's the Lord's Supper. But it just seems to be Luke is telling you how they ate their meals together regularly. But then he gets to the prayers, and he says, now this seems to be talking about their formal worship, because he doesn't just say in prayer or in praying, but he says the prayers, and he uses the definite article, like he's talking about a certain kind of praying together. Well, okay, well he uses the definite article in front of bread too. The breaking of the bread. And so I think we should understand that to be talking about the Lord's Supper, and as a way of talking about, as by synecdoche, using a part of something to refer to the whole thing. He's talking about their worship, and that taking the Lord's Supper is the central thing that brings them together, and we see that later, right? In chapter 20, in verse 7, they came together on the first day of the week to break bread, and then we learn that Paul preached to them, and then that's what they did, and we put those verses together. So it seems to me, I wouldn't be dogmatic about it, but it seems to be distinguished from verse 46 and how they were eating their bread in their homes. and that it's talking about a specific kind of breaking of bread. When they would break the bread as Jesus did, he took the bread and he broke it. He took the bread, and when he gave it to the disciples, he broke it apart and passed it out to them. And so that becomes a way of talking about when we commune, and there's that word, communion. It's the Lord's Supper itself is a manifestation of that joint, of that relationship we have, that joint participation in his body and in his blood. Paul says that in 1 Corinthians 10:16, the bread we break, the cup we drink. He talks about the bread which we break. Is it not a communion with the body of the Lord? So it seems to me that that's what he's referring to. And I noticed I have 1 Corinthians 10 there, for verse 16. And then he says the prayers, okay, also in the prayers. So you may recall, if you were in that extended study we did, Introduction to the Gospels, that this was something we brought out as a theme in Luke Acts. Luke emphasizes prayer more than Matthew, Mark, and John do. He really highlights prayer in the life of Jesus. The lesson where I bring that out, if you go back to the Introduction to the Gospel series, it's in class 33, the 9th class on Luke. I know that's a little bit hard to see, but I'm just trying to get it in the recording. And so it was in that class that in the file, and I know now it's very confusifying, but the file that has all the scriptures that we looked at on the boards in that class is actually, when you click on the link below and it takes you to the folder with all those files, it's file 20. In these last classes now that I'm doing on Acts and Romans, each file corresponds to the class 1, file 1, class 2, file 2, but back then I was making one file last for several classes, so the numbering got off, so it's confusing. But if you find it the way they're numbered at the time of this recording, I'm going to try to go back and fix all that, but it's in file 20. But one of the as we went through that, themes in theology, one of the themes we said we find in Luke, of course, in Acts is Luke part 2. Luke's writing is prayer. And I pointed out how he highlights, uniquely in Acts, he highlights Jesus' own prayer life. He says more in Luke about Jesus' prayer life than you find in all the other Gospels put together. He records 9 times that Jesus prays. Only 2 times do you see that in the Gospels. And he records about Jesus' prayer life. So, for example, when Jesus is baptized and the Holy Spirit descends on him in the form of a dove, only Luke says it was as he was praying. As he was praying. So this is where you start to notice, Luke is really trying to emphasize something here about the importance of prayer and how you see it in the life of Jesus and you see it in the life of the church. And the same with the Transfiguration when he appeared in glory with Moses and Elijah. It was in connection with him praying. And I'm not going to go through all those references, but you see it there. And in Jesus' teaching about prayer, not only does he show it in his own prayer life and how the disciples ask him to teach that, it's only in Luke they say, Lord, teach us how to pray. So they saw in Jesus apparently a level of prayer that they wanted to understand. And a couple of unique parables about persisting in prayer, and it's very prominent in the beautiful birth narratives. Well, when you come to Acts then, we're going to see that as we go through Acts. So we're taking our time, especially here, really digging in with Acts 2 like we did with Romans 1 and Romans 8. And I know we can't take 8 classes to get through every chapter of the rest of the book of Acts. But I'm trying to highlight all these things when they first appear, and then we'll see them throughout the rest of the book of Acts, and we can just recall that and notice it again. And so we can get that emphasis, we can get that focus that we see coming up in the emphases that Luke makes. But we already saw it in chapter 1 and how they engage in prayer about replacing Judas here in 2:42. Later in chapter 4, Luke's going to record a lengthy prayer where they cite Psalm 2. I think it's a thrilling passage. They're all filled with the Holy Spirit, and the place is moved, and it's very powerful when they come back together and the church prays together. And we'll see it again in chapter 6 in connection with the apostles. I think this is a great observation. We'll talk about it then when we get there, but just let me throw it out there, that the apostles tell the assembly, you need to find some who can wait on tables and take care of the needs of these widows. Do you remember why? Why the apostles said you need, so we can devote ourselves to prayer. So it's interesting to me. He says so that we can devote ourselves to prayer and of course and to the teaching. The ESV says, I wanted to make sure I got it right, the ministry of the word, or in service of the word. So they had a certain focus, to focus on the teaching of the word, and to take them aside every day and have them heavily involved. Of course, everyone should serve, and no one's above menial tasks that we may be called to do and for each other in the church. But for them to be called aside to be distributing food and collecting food and taking care of all that, when there were so many people that needed to be taught and there was so much teaching that needed to be done. But he says so that we can devote ourselves to the word and to prayer. So to have time to pray that much and in that way. And we'll see as we go through these other accounts. Again and again, Saul is praying, we find, when Ananias comes to him. And Peter is praying when God sends, he goes up, there's the hour of prayer. We'll see it here and coming up in chapter 3. They go to the temple to pray. Prayer was a systematic part of their lives as Jews under the Old Covenant. And they're going to the temple at the time, a set time to pray. And we'll see that with Peter when the Lord sends him to the household of Cornelius. He goes up on the roof to pray. Cornelius is involved in prayer, and God tells Cornelius, your prayers have been heard. We'll see it again and again. What is the Philippian jailer here when Paul and Silas are in the stocks in the prison? He hears them praying and singing. And that no doubt that made an impression on him when they saved his life as well, and he asked what to do to be saved. But he heard their prayers. So we'll look for that as we go through a lot. There's a lot more to come then on that. But this idea of all things common, I mentioned your name, Lucy, because you suffered and your family suffered, and you know people still suffering the effects of the communist rule that dominated Eastern Europe under the Soviet Empire. After World War II, but the effects of which still linger today, even after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union, right? The people still live under a mentality, under a system that's well entrenched, that may take generations to break away from. But many times people will appeal to this text to support this socialist idea that it's the duty of the state to make sure everyone has everything equal, right? That, what's the saying? From each according to his means, and to each according to his need. So you take from each according to what they have, and you distribute to each according to what they need. And so it all sounds so good. If you have no experience with reality in the real world, it all sounds so good, right? Why should some people have so much stuff and be so wealthy and be drinking $3,000 bottles of champagne and eating at luxury, living in luxury apartments that cost tens of millions of dollars, and eating steak dinners at 5-star restaurants that cost $1,500, and wearing $5,000 suits, and other people can barely get their children fed and can barely get through the day. It doesn't seem fair, right? So we should take from the people who have a lot, and the goal of government should be to make everyone equal and redistribute that wealth so we can share it, right? Now, you're a Christian. Don't you believe that? Isn't that what you see in your Bible? Isn't that what you see in Acts 2? So people will apply to Scripture to support that socialist idea. Now, of course, under communism, it's through the rank power of the state, through the tyranny of the all-powerful state. But what we're seeing in the West is people who did not live through the tyranny of communism and the suffering brought by socialism, a generation that's come up that thinks the world just started 20 minutes ago when they were born, and doesn't realize how people have suffered so tremendously under attempts to implement that kind of ideology. It sounds so good on the surface, right? And a lot of times they'll appeal to Scripture. Isn't that how we should love each other? Isn't that how we should take care of each other? Shouldn't we as Christians be in favor of that sort of thing? Well, is this what they did? Notice it says that, and I'm kind of passing by verse 43, but we'll see this again and again, and he'll give us some examples of it. That awe, I listed this earlier when Luke keeps telling us about the wonder created by the power manifested, the power of the Spirit and the miracles the apostles were performing. And the awe that came on every soul. Wonder, see, that's a way of describing miracles in terms of the effect that they have on people. Create wonder. And they're signs that shows you the design of the miracle. They point you to something, all right? So the wonders and signs that were done through the apostles. But now notice verse 43. And all who believed were together and had all things common. By the way, I think that shows you not everyone was operating, that at this point, it's only the apostles who have the capacity to have any supernatural power of the Spirit like that. And he makes sure to show that the apostles are the ones here demonstrating that things are centering around the authority of the apostles again. But he says, and those who were believed together, they had all things common, right? So why don't we do this tonight? Some of you have nicer houses than I have. And you got more square feet, and you got nicer cars, and you got nicer stuff. And there's some people here don't have a whole lot, and I think we should this looks better to me. Why don't we just sell what we have and pool it all together, and we'll just share everything in common, right? See, it sounds so idyllic. It's so naive to think that this is what socialism is about. Let's notice how it's different here in a minute. They sold their possessions and belongings, and they distributed the proceeds to all as any had need. Now, why are people in need here? What's the situation? It's the Feast of Pentecost. People have traveled from around the Mediterranean. Jews have come from around the Mediterranean world from the call of the covenant, of the Mosaic covenant, to come to Jerusalem, to make this pilgrimage, if possible. And so Jerusalem has swelled multiple times its normal population. And you have all these Jews who came for the Feast of Pentecost. So it's a high and holy time. But they were not planning to stay there, right? So they had provisions to come and be a part of the feast and then eventually travel back home. But see, now they're settling down and their lives have changed. And they're staying there. And they don't all have a way to, they can't just pull out their bank card and go take out some money at the money machine. And they brought what they had for the plans that they had made, but now we find out these people from around the area now, as they've stayed, and now they're growing, and they're apparently lingering there for well beyond what they had originally intended. Obviously, some of them are in need, the ones who are not local especially. So they sell their possessions. Now imagine, this is remarkable demonstration of commitment to each other and love, to think that they would, hey, there's some of the new believers here that they need something to eat, they need a place to stay, we need to put them up somewhere. Well, I've got these oxen, and I've got a cart. Well, I've got property outside of Jerusalem. People selling what they had and bringing the money, taking care of each other. That is beautiful. We should take care of each other's needs. And if we're in a situation that's like this, and that's what we needed to do, would you sell something you had if you knew that Kim and I were going to go hungry or be sleeping out on the street, and that the only way you could put me up somewhere and take care of us for a while was to sell something you have? Would you do that? It's really beyond our ability to realistically comprehend that or imagine that, because we have the disposable income, or we have other ways that we can take care of each other that way. But I believe you would do that for me. I believe I would do that for you if that's what we needed to do. But it's a much different situation we're in. But it is a beautiful thing to think we should take care of each other. We shouldn't allow other Christians who are not able to. Now, we don't mean people who won't work. Paul addresses that in 2 Thessalonians 3, right? In verses 6 through 10, if a man won't work, neither let him eat. He didn't want the church helping people who could work, but were just refusing to work, and we're just sort of mooching off of the brethren, off of taking advantage of the church. Paul had very strong words about that, and in fact, he said to disfellowship those, not to allow in their fellowship those who were doing that. But we shouldn't let other Christians go hungry when we can step in and help each other, or go without a place to stay. And their basic needs like that, right? In this congregation, we do help each other. We do have money budgeted, and oftentimes we go beyond that, and many times it's individuals, beyond what we do collectively through our contribution we make every first day of the week when we set aside regularly what we have. And so we help people collectively that way from the treasury. But I know many of you have helped others in this church out of your own pocket individually, or people that we don't even know about that you've helped and assisted. This is one of the ways Luke is showing you that this new covenant age, when there's a period that begins, and we're looking forward to the culmination of it in the new heavens and new earth where righteousness dwells, Peter says. In the age to come, it will be fully realized. But even now, we're seeing a glimpse of this new age when the poor are being cared for, and when there is an experience of God's love, of God's care in these disciples ministering to one another. So it's very powerful and it's very important, but let's not abuse it or misunderstand it. So they sold their possessions and their belongings, the text says, and they distributed the proceeds to all as any had need. Now, how is this different from the idea of socialism? Is it support for the doctrine that of socialism as a governing principle? How is it different? Okay, voluntarily. You got to my second one first. So, okay. First of all, it was voluntary. And you see that in chapter 5, right, when Ananias and Sapphira lie about they wanted more credit. They wanted credit for being very magnanimous like this, very generous. So they brought some money from the property they sold and said, here it is, we're giving it all to the Lord. You know, they're apparently they conspired together to make it look like they were more generous than they really were, and they're struck dead. I think it's because the Lord was maintaining the respect for the apostolic authority, and they were lying to Peter, they were lying to the apostles, and that could not be tolerated. So they're struck dead, but what does Peter say to him? He said, look, no one was forcing you to do this, if you allow me to paraphrase. He said, when it was in your possession, was it not your own? So he tells him that was totally voluntary on your part. You were not being compelled to go sell what you had and bring all the proceeds to us. So that's a key element here, because when Luke tells us that this was continuing, and he points to Barnabas as a man of means who was quite generous, and then Ananias and Sapphira wanted to get that same kind of notoriety, it's very clear that this was something they were doing voluntarily. It was not by compulsion. But what else? We have a winner, but you didn't buzz in with your buzzer, or you didn't put your answer in the form of a question. Or no. All right. Yeah, this was not the state. This was not the state compelling the citizens to do this, right? Now, if people want to say, hey, I think if we didn't have the welfare state, and I do think it's good to live in a nation where collectively part of our tax money goes to helping people who are desperate and who are in need, and there are people who can't take care of themselves and don't have family and really are in dire circumstances, and that's different, though, than a whole entitlement mentality that the government should give me everything I need. The government should provide all these things for me. The government should give me, I should get 8 weeks of paid leave. The government should force my employer to let me off work for 8 weeks of vacation every year, and the government should pay for my child care and pay for my college and pay for my kids' tuition and this and that and the other, and that if anywhere anyone is ever hungry, that somehow this is a failure of government, or if anyone ever has more than anyone else, and there's not, this is the new word, not equality, the new word is equity, where somehow if there are some people that have much higher income, you hear a lot about income inequality, as though somehow that's an injustice in the world, how some people have a great deal of income compared to others. And they'll say, well, see, that's an indication that something is wrong in the world, and so the government must fix that. Well, we do think it's good that collectively, as a society, we can pool our money and have programs. We know someone who was blind that we worked with in the church in Virginia, and there's a government home that she lived in, and an institution that provided for people that were profoundly handicapped in that way. And I'm glad that we had that resource for her, because frankly they were able to take care of her in a way that maybe individual Christians would find it more difficult to do. But if we didn't have those things, how were people taken care of before the state, before people got the idea the state should take care of everyone's needs? It was Christians, right? Benevolent institutions, orphanages, hospitals, shelters, homes. Those things were unheard of in the ancient Roman world. There was no benevolent care from the Roman Empire for its citizens. There were no state-run orphanages or institutions for the handicapped, the disabled. One of the reasons the Christians had such a powerful impact, even though they were persecuted, people could not help but be struck by the way that they loved and took care of the needy and sacrificed their own well-being for the good of others. And this is where those kinds of institutions originated. But in a secular society where the church is no longer dominant in the society, then the state, people look at the state. The state should step in and be a father to my children. The state should step in and take care of my family. The state, then the government has to do all that. So this is not the state. This is the church acting. And the church, I wish we had benevolent presence in the community. I wish we had a crisis pregnancy center for women who are contemplating abortion and need help with diapers and food and assistance, both prenatal and postnatal, for their babies after they're born. And I know there are denominations that have a lot of good works like that, benevolent works, and have soup kitchens and shelters and things like that. We in the Churches of Christ don't have those kinds of things in an organized way like many denominations do, and part of that's because of the nature of the individual congregations of the church, autonomous. We don't send our money to some headquarters that will then go out for all the churches of Christ and build these sort of hospitals and clinics and what have you. But we do have orphanages, right? And we do support the care of children through that means. And it would probably be better if we were more personally and directly involved with a local orphanage. But here he's talking about, so in other words, part of the problem is because in the secular West, where the church doesn't have the dominance it once did, people do look to the state then to do what churches once did. But think of all the benevolent good that has been done, and even though we don't agree with their doctrine, the Catholic Church has many benevolent institutions that have done tremendous good through the ages for the needy. You think of leper colonies and things, for example, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and she's a high-profile figure that many people know about, someone who devoted her whole life to the care of the poor. That's something that makes a tremendous impact, and we should be involved in. And here he's talking about taking care of each other in the context of this new community, and it's not an endorsement of state-compelled redistribution of wealth. And in the socialist mentality, your property doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the collective. But that's not biblical either. And in fact, I think the Bible teaches the right of individual property, and that right must be respected. And that's why it's a sin to steal, to take what is not yours, what doesn't belong to you, because you're disrespecting a person, because a person has a connection with his property. The Founding Fathers recognized that, and the importance of allowing for the possession of property under our democratic republic that we live in. Oh, and what I because my thoughts have been wandering here and there, what I didn't say earlier is where you had the tyrannical enforcement of socialism in, say, the Soviet Union or in communist countries. In the West, people are just wanting to do the same thing, only elect the tyrants who do it. So it's democratic. It's called democratic socialism. You're still getting to elect the people who are going to take all your stuff from you. So it's not like a dictatorship. It's not like communism. It's not like Mao and Stalin and all of that where the state does it all. No, we're all still going to choose our own leaders who are then going to take all of our property away and redistribute it. But personal property is affirmed even throughout the book of Acts. Even throughout the book of Acts, and I'm listing a bunch of scriptures there from the epistles as well, where it's quite clear that we are allowed to keep and maintain our property, that when you become a Christian, that the idyllic Christian life is not that, well, now you don't have stuff anymore, and we all just sell our stuff and just feed each other and take care of each other and have a big, commune, like they were popular in the 60s. Where people go join, they just sell all their stuff and go join a commune and smoke pot and wear tie-dye and all that stuff. So in 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19, Paul did not teach that it was wrong to be rich. Paul told Timothy, charge those who are rich in this world not to be high-minded, not to be prideful. And he said, or set their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God. He said, so he's saying they should have a right perspective about their wealth. And then he says, and teach them to be good and to communicate, to share, to be generous in good works. So to use their wealth for the good of others. And I've seen that in the church again and again. Brethren who have great means, they're very successful in the business world, and they're extremely generous with their money in helping the church and helping individuals, helping mission work, imagine that. We don't want to have rich people because then it means some people have a lot and other people don't have as much. But you think about the good that God has done through brothers and sisters in Christ who have been blessed with financial means and we need to keep that in perspective as well. That Paul told Timothy in that text that it's not wrong to be rich. We just need to have the right perspective on our wealth and use it to support good works on behalf of others. Okay, all of that about that sharing together. Any question or comment? Yeah. Yeah. Some of them, yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, where neither rust consumes or thieves break through and steal, right? R- Right. So that's and that is what Paul says in that passage. That's what you're talking about right here, is what he says in 1 Timothy 6. He said, teach them, don't put your hope on the uncertainty of riches. You could lose it, and many of them did lose their wealth, as you pointed out. But to be rich in good works and to help, to use it, because we will give an account to God for how we've used it. So, that's exactly the kind of thing that Paul was addressing there, and that Jesus does, as you said, in the Sermon on the Mountain. And Jesus, in fact, in his parables and in his teaching, has a great deal to say about the use of wealth and stewardship. So it's a tremendously important perspective. I do want to add one other thing. Since we're seeing the rise of socialism, more and more young adults, when they're surveyed, like I believe college-age kids say that they're in favor of socialism. They have no idea what of the misery that it brings to the world. But whenever people think, well, yeah, of course we're in favor of socialism because we're in favor of equality. But what socialism has done everywhere that it's been tried is it has resulted in equality of misery. That's what it does. It equally distributes suffering to everybody who lives under it. That's the equality you get. When you look at people who have more, I like Bono, my favorite rock group, U2. He's the most famous rock star in the world of our generation, Bono. And he loves America, and he talks about the American dream. And he didn't care for this idea, when I heard him address this one time, of sort of despising people who have a lot more and feeling like they need to be brought down to the level of everybody else. And instead he said what he liked about America is you could look at that guy with that big mansion up on the hill and say, one day that's going to be me. I'm going to be that guy. Instead of saying he needs to come down here and let's all be poor together, I need to realize I have opportunity to try to better my situation and be motivated by that and do well. But this idea that of a zero-sum game of economics, that as though wealth in our culture is a pie, and that if some people have a big piece, that means there's less for you. That's not how the economy works. If some people have a lot more, the conditions that allow for that person to have a lot more allow me to have a better life too. That's what people don't understand. I could talk all night about the biblical view of economics and government, but I better not. Well, actually I did. So my apologies. So, but notice, sorry, you get to see my grandson's little cute Tootsie there. Should come back up, though. Does anyone remember Windows 95 and the blue screen of death? You know, whenever whenever you'd get, you try to boot up, or you're in the middle of something you spent hours on, and then your computer locked up and crashed, and you'd get the blue screen of death. I have this nice little slide to sort of summarize all this. There we go. Make sure this is the one. You see my little circle, how it quit? Any other comments about socialism and the redistribution of wealth while we're waiting for this to pop back up? Look at the end of the chapter here. Is what I want to show is. All right, everyone, just say a silent prayer. Yeah, go ahead, Jerry. Let me take it off the screen. That might be the problem. Yeah, Ephesians 4, so that he may have to give to those who are in need. Right, yeah. Yeah, so I know a lot of people oppose, say, capitalism on the grounds that it promotes greed. It promotes greed, that it's all about just letting people pursue wealth unhinged. And so in a capitalistic system, you have people who accumulate vast sums of wealth, and that is an unbiblical perspective, because life isn't about accumulating wealth, and it isn't about. But what they fail to realize is wherever free markets are allowed to prevail, and wherever capitalism is allowed to thrive, it lifts more people out of poverty than anything else ever has in the course of human history. Never in the history of the world have more people been lifted out of the dregs of the depths of poverty than through the capitalist system. So people who want to sort of selectively look at it is like, well, you got hedge fund managers who are making billions of dollars just moving people's money around from here to there. That doesn't seem fair. Where I'm working, I'm working 60 hours a week at a minimum wage job and can barely feed my family. That doesn't seem fair. And so they think if we just take from those people and give to everyone else, that'll make things better for everyone. And as we said, all it does is make things worse. But you're right. Where capitalism is not a perfect system, because it can be exploited, Jerry, what you're saying is, and we would agree, last try, and I'll just give up on it. All right. But I found out when it crashed, none of the recording stayed, so I lost everything that I recorded. So that means I'll have to go in my office and re-record it. But what the biblical ethic does is it brings a sense of personal responsibility, like you're saying, to the acquisition of wealth. We want freedom for people to be able to pursue wealth, even if it's vast sums of wealth, even if some people have more talents and opportunities that allow them to become much richer than other people. But when we factor in our obligation to God, see, the Christian ethic would temper that with a sense of responsibility to use it Not that money is all about my personal consumption and just accumulating wealth for the sake of it, but to use it, like you said, for the good of others. So that's why, to me, the biblical perspective is the ideal one, because it takes a free market system but incorporates individual responsibility and accountability, not forcing it by the hand of the government from without, but from the heart, a transformed heart, a heart that's transformed by the love of Christ from within, right? So it's a big difference. But the way the text ends, I know the bell rang, isn't it beautiful? He talks about that how awe and wonder came on every soul. They were sharing what they had. They were worshiping God together. They had this great joy. They were eating together every day in their homes. It was very important. They were spending time with each other. They were getting to know each other. They were caring for each other. And all of this is showing in this. This is sort of the ideal situation we see in these early days of the church, as it's just there in Jerusalem, is that this is what the kingdom of God can be. This is what you're seeing. Oh, you're not seeing that. That I pulled all those words up thinking you were impressed with my list of things. But this is the Lord at work forming this new community. And it's the Spirit of God at work in the people of God and showing us the love of God as it becomes real and realized and manifested. And that transformed the world. They turned the world upside down because of this conviction they had for the doctrine of Christ, for the truth about Christ, but for living out that truth in real, tangible ways in their intimate association with each other and in their care for one another and for those around them. And that's the way we will have an impact in this community as well, right? So that's a real challenge to us. And so everyone's free to go, but I'll let Jerry kind of finish. Yeah, 1 Timothy 5. Yeah, they thought they had they found a loophole to get out of taking care of their own family. And by the way, let me add to that, Jerry. 1 Timothy 5, when Paul said, if a man won't take care of his own household, he's worse than an unbeliever, right? He's chastising the church. In that context, he's talking about the church not giving money to help widows who have family that could help them. He said, let their family first help them, that the church be not burdened, right? So in other words, God's design is family is to take care of family. Now, if you have no family to take care of you, we'll help, we'll step in, right? But we have a duty first to our own families, and people who come oftentimes with their hand out and want something from the church and expect us to help, if they have family to help them, their family needs to step up and help them first. And then only if they don't have that, then Paul said, then the church can help those widows who are widows indeed. So you're bringing up a lot of great stuff, Jerry, about wealth and the proper use of wealth and God's purpose for our stewardship of wealth. So I'm gonna have to go re-record this whole class. I don't feel like doing it tonight though, so maybe tomorrow. I got to do it while it's fresh in my head.